Hello, Year 9. Your first job this week is going to be to write a really brief description about which energy resource you think is the best and which you think is the worst. Okay, so we've looked at lots of different types over the last few weeks. We've looked at coal, we've looked at gas, we've looked at hydroelectricity, we've looked at solar, we've looked at wind, we've looked at lots. And we've talked about the advantages and disadvantages and how they use and how they work. Now, I just want you to write a brief sentence saying which one you think is the best and why, and which one you think is the worst and why. That's the first thing you're going to be submitting to class chats. So pause the video here, spend no more than 10 minutes, 5 minutes is probably the best, okay, to write that little brief description about which is the best, which is the worst. Okay, so pause the video now. Okay, so this week we're summing up energy resources. Okay, we're looking at how we've changed the amounts of different energy resources we use in the UK and the world, and then we're going to do a summary activity. So, first, with the trends section here, the exam board really likes to use your math skills. Okay, it's a chance for them to show you different graphs and you to interpret them. Okay, so you need to be pretty good at looking at some information in the form of a chart or a graph and figuring out what it says. So here we've got the electricity generated by fuel type in 2016 and 2017. And we're looking at these two different pie charts. And a typical question could be, okay, so how did the energy generation in the UK change between 2016 and 2017? And you'd have to look at this pie chart and think, okay, so it's got these different types of energies, and then look at this one, and it's got these types of energies, and look at, okay, so what's the differences, what's the similarities? Okay, and I think the easiest way to go through with this type of pie chart, would be to look at each section individually. So you look at, first we'll start at coal because it's at the top. So coal's 9%, it's then 6.7% in 2017, it's gone down. So coal's gone down. Okay, oil and other fuels, they've also gone down. Gas has gone down. Nuclear has gone down. Hydro, that's gone up a little bit. Okay, wind and solar has gone up. Okay, other renewables has gone up. Okay, so that'd be the first step in the analysis. The second thing would be, okay, so how much? Okay, gas went up by just under 2%. So getting the numbers, subtracting the numbers. Okay, that would be the second level of analysis. So the first thing would be just the gross change of what's gone up, what's gone down. The second would be the detail of, okay, so some of it's gone up by this amount. The higher level stuff, the stuff that's difficult, is then thinking, okay, so why? What's the similarities between all the things that have gone down and all the things that have gone up? Well, the things that have gone down are coal, oil, and gas. Okay, these are the things that have gone down. They were above 50%. They're now slightly below 50%, give or take. Yeah. Why would that be? Okay, a higher level question might ask you to suggest a reason for these changes. And you'd have to recall, you'd have to understand that, okay, so these are all fossil fuels. They're non-renewables. Okay, our use of non-renewables has gone down because the government is spending more money in using renewable fuels. Because it's better for the environment, it doesn't release greenhouse gases, which contribute to global warming and a climate emergency. Okay, so 3 levels that you could get this type of graph and this kind of question asked in your exams. Okay, and that's one way the changes and the trends in our energy use can be presented. Another way is this. Okay, this is a different graph. This is showing a similar thing, so it's still showing percentages of energy resources, but it's not in a pie chart, it's going through year by year, and this is going from 1996 all the way to 2017. And we've got all these different coloured lines. Quite a complicated graph. To be honest, I don't really like it. I don't like the way this is presented. But this is a common way to show how the energy generation changes over the years. Okay, so if we look at coal, which is probably the most interesting because it changes the most. So in 1996, it was the biggest contributor to electricity generation in the UK. Okay, it was more than 40% of all of the generated power. Okay, and as we've gone along, it's fluctuated a little bit. It dipped just before 10, so there's a little bit of a dip here. It rose again, but now over the last 10 years, really, it's steadily declined, and this has kept going. Okay, we've used very little coal this year. Okay, it's approaching the levels that oil and other fuels are. Okay, so our use of coal has changed. Okay, wind and solar, they've increased. Natural gas has also increased. Okay, so you need to be able to look at this graph and interpret what's happening to the changes. Because you could be asked a question of describe some of the changes that have happened between over the years 1996 to 2017, and you'd have to look at this graph. You have to pick some information from it and maybe quote some numbers. So at the beginning in 1996, over 40%, and then in 2017, less than 10%. You could talk about those changes. You need to be able to describe and interpret those graphs. Okay, here's another way of presenting the data. Okay, so this time we've got shaded area, so the total amount of power. So rather than a percentage, this is the total amount of energy being used. So the total amount of energy being used from 1970 to 2006 has been steadily increasing. Okay, steadily increasing. The coal, oil, so the coal, biomass and open gas, so this is one type of gas generation, is this grey area, and this was it was the biggest proportion up until relatively recently. So here we start to use a new form of combined gas cycle. So this uses the heat from the gas as well as the jet from the gas to spin a turbine. So this uses a combined cycle. It's more efficient. Okay, produces more energy for how much gas you use. Okay, so they split it up around 1992. And this kind of shows how that has changed and how nuclear has started off quite small, relatively small in 1917. That's got bigger. But even more than that, the renewables, which were barely present up until the 2000s, have become a large proportion of the energy drawn, energy resource used in these later years. Okay, and that trend has gone on. So there's lots of different ways you can present this data. So as well as interpreting these graphs, you also need to be able to suggest reasons for those changes. And that's where your understanding of the advantages and disadvantages of the different sources comes into play. Okay, so we need to think about startup costs. Okay, the cost of producing electricity. So nuclear, okay, 90 pounds per megawatt hour. So this is just a unit of energy. So you can get information about how much cost it is for the different types. So according to this set of information, coal is the most expensive at the moment for generating electricity. Okay, wind is cheaper, but there's more to it than just those running costs. There's more to it than just that. There's the startup cost and the running costs. So it takes a lot of money to build a wind farm. Okay, it takes quite a bit of money to maintain that wind farm. Okay, gas, it doesn't take that much money to actually build the gas power plants, and the cost of fuel is quite low. Okay, so why don't we just all have just gas power plants? Because there's other disadvantages. They'll produce greenhouse gases, they'll produce sulfur dioxides that will contribute to acid rain. Okay, as well as that, there's reliability problems. So why can't we just use wind and solar? Okay, they are not as reliable as coal and oil. Okay, startup time. Okay, it takes a long time to turn on a nuclear power station. It doesn't take a long time to turn on a natural gas power station. Okay, sometimes that reliability and startup time isn't as important as others, but it is a massive factor if that's the only type you're going to use. If we only generated our electricity using wind, it wouldn't be reliable. We wouldn't know if we could turn on the kettle to get a cup of tea. Okay, if we only use nuclear, because it's got such a long startup time, again, we wouldn't be able to have a cup of tea after EastEnders. Okay, because we wouldn't be able to turn on enough power stations to generate all that electricity. Okay, so there's a mix of reasons behind which energy resource is the most appropriate for different situations. Okay, so This is a checklist of all the different things we have covered over the last few weeks on energy resources. So we've got the resources and their uses. We've got wind, solar and geothermal. We've got that wind, solar and geothermal continued. We've got hydroelectricity, waves and tides. We've got biofuels and non-renewables. And we've got these trends in energy uses. So your big task for this last week, okay, you need to make a summary of all the information in energy resources. Now, it can take the form of any creative way you want to summarize it. There's lots of help that you can find on the website in the sort section. But if it was me doing it, I would make a big spider diagram because I love my spider diagrams or a mind map. Okay, but you can make some good quality flashcards. That might be a really good use, actually. You could do a flashcard for each energy resource. You could make a really good poster. You could make a little video. You could make a wrap. You could make a PowerPoint presentation. You can do any kind of really creative summary activity about energy resources. Okay, you have to include the names of all the different energy resources we've covered. You have to include their advantages and disadvantages. You want to include diagrams and pictures, an explanation of how they work, okay, how the use has changed, so which would we use the most, which would we use the least, how that's changed over the last 20, 30, 50 years, and maybe why it's changed, okay. You can use the topic checklists, these, to help you in your summary. Now, these are going to be included in the classwork, the class charts, as well as in this video here, okay. There'll be another video next week on the Friday, talking about what you can be doing over the summer holidays. Okay, but this is the last big set of work. Okay, so I hope you're doing all well at home. Take care, Year 9, and goodbye.